The lonesome howl of the wind carried a melody so sweet that Isaac Blackwood reined his horse to a halt, the sound stopping him dead in his tracks. It wasn't the wind at all, but a woman's voice, clear as a bell despite the gusting prairie air. In his 15 years of riding the frontier, he'd never heard anything quite like it. Wyoming Territory, 1876. Isaac had been riding for 3 days straight, exhausted from delivering a herd of cattle to a ranch outside Cheyenne. The spring air still carried winter's bite at night, and he'd been searching for shelter when the singing reached him. He guided his horse toward the source, topping a gentle rise to find a small cabin nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. There, on the porch, stood a young woman rocking a swaddled infant in her arms. Her chestnut hair whipped around her face as she sang, unaware of his approach. The baby's cries diminished to whimpers with each verse of her lullaby. Isaac cleared his throat and removed his hat. "Evening, madam. Don't mean to intrude." The woman startled, clutching her baby closer. "Who are you? What do you want?" Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Name's Isaac Blackwood. Just passing through." He kept his distance, knowing full well how a strange man might appear to a woman alone. "Your singing caught my ear. Never heard anything like it." Her posture relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in her eyes. "It's the only thing that calms him," she said, nodding to the bundle in her arms. "When the wind kicks up like this, he gets frightful." Isaac nodded, noting the weathered look of the cabin. "You out here alone, madam?" "I'm Willa Montgomery. And yes, it's just Thomas and me." She lifted her chin slightly, a gesture of defiance against whatever judgment he might offer. "Storm's coming," Isaac said, gesturing to the darkening sky behind him. "Might I trouble you for your barn? Just need somewhere to wait it out." Willa studied him, weighing her options. A rumble of thunder punctuated the moment. "The barn's around back," she finally said. "There's hay for your horse." Isaac tipped his hat. "Much obliged, Mrs. Montgomery." "Miss," she corrected, something unreadable crossing her face. "It's Miss Montgomery." The baby in her arms began to fuss again as another gust of wind rattled the cabin's shutters. Immediately, Willa resumed her singing, a haunting melody that seemed to blend with the wind rather than fight against it. The infant quieted almost instantly. Isaac led his horse around back, wondering what circumstances had left a young woman and her baby alone in this remote stretch of territory. Such solitude wasn't kind to anyone, least of all a mother with a young child. The barn was small but sturdy, with a few empty stalls and a loft full of fresh hay. Isaac unsaddled his horse, a dependable buckskin gelding named Chief, and rubbed him down before settling him with feed and water. By the time he finished, rain had begun to pelt the roof, accompanied by flashes of lightning. He spread his bedroll in an empty stall and was preparing to settle in when the barn door creaked open. Willa stood there, a lantern in one hand, the baby secured against her with her other arm. "It's no night to sleep in a barn," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." Isaac stood, brushing hay from his clothes. "That's mighty kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not kindness," Willa replied. "It's practicality. I'd rather have you where I can see you than wondering what you're doing out here all night." Isaac couldn't help but smile at her frankness. Fair enough. The cabin was simple but clean, consisting of a main room with a cook stove, table, and 2 chairs, plus a small bedroom off to the side. A handmade crib stood near the stove, and Willa placed the now sleeping baby in it before ladling stew into a bowl. "You're a long way from anywhere," Isaac observed, accepting the bowl with gratitude. The stew was hearty with chunks of rabbit, potatoes, and wild onions. "That's by design," Willa answered, taking a seat across from him. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with striking green eyes that seemed too wise for her years. Not many people come this way. Your husband? Isaac let the question hang. There isn't one, she replied sharply. Never was. Isaac nodded, understanding the situation without further explanation. Such circumstances weren't uncommon, though few women faced them alone in the wilderness. Where you headed? Willa asked, changing the subject. Fort Laramie, then wherever the next job takes me. I drive cattle mostly, do some scouting when ranches need it. The baby stirred in his crib, and Willa immediately tensed, watching him closely. When he settled again, she exhaled slowly. He doesn't sleep well, she explained. The wind frightens him, and when he gets started crying, sometimes he won't stop for hours. But the singing. She trailed off, looking at her son with unmistakable love. My mother used to sing to me that way, said it was an old song from the old country. I never understood the words, but the melody stayed with me. Isaac finished his stew in appreciative silence. Where's your nearest neighbor? Greeley's trading post is about 10 miles east. The Wilkinsons have a place about 15 miles south. They check on me when they can. And that's enough for you? Living out here like this? Willa's expression hardened. It has to be. Towns aren't always kind to women in my situation. Before Isaac could respond, the baby woke with a piercing cry. Willa was on her feet instantly, scooping him up and beginning to pace. The storm outside intensified, wind howling through every crack in the cabin walls, and the baby's cries grew more frantic. Shoo, Thomas, shoo, Willa murmured, beginning her song again. But this time the infant wasn't soothed. His face reddened with each scream, tiny fists balled in distress. Isaac watched as Willa's composure began to crack. Exhaustion lined her face, and he suspected this was a nightly battle. May I? He asked, standing and extending his arms. Willa looked at him as if he'd suggested something outlandish. You want to hold him? Sometimes a new pair of arms does the trick, Isaac said. My sister had 6 little ones. I've had some practice. After a moment's hesitation, Willa carefully transferred the wailing infant to Isaac's arms. The cowboy cradled the baby against his chest, one large hand supporting his head, and began to rock slowly from side to side. Now, little man, he said in a low, rumbling voice. That's quite a set of lungs you've got there. To Willa's evident surprise, Thomas's cries began to subside. He hiccuped and stared up at Isaac with wide, curious eyes. Well, I'll be, Willa whispered. He usually doesn't take to strangers. Guess I don't count as a stranger anymore, Isaac replied with a smile. He continued rocking the baby gently. Your mama was singing you such a pretty song. Would you like to hear it again? Willa hesitated, then began to sing softly. The combination of her voice and Isaac's gentle rocking soon had Thomas's eyelids drooping. Within minutes, the baby was asleep. You've got a gift, Willa said as Isaac carefully returned Thomas to his crib. Just experience, he replied. And a little luck. They stood side by side, watching the sleeping infant. For a moment, they might have been any young family, sharing the quiet triumph of a child peacefully at rest. You can take the chair for the night, Willa said, breaking the spell. It's not much, but it's better than the barn floor. I'm obliged, Isaac replied, though he had no intention of taking her only comfortable seat. But I've slept on worse than your floor, and that's the truth. Willa didn't argue, her own exhaustion evident. She disappeared into the small bedroom while Isaac arranged his bedroll near the stove. As he lay there, listening to the storm batter the cabin, he found himself wondering about the woman and child sleeping just a few feet away. What had brought Willa Montgomery to this lonely outpost? And what would become of her and her son as the years passed? Such thoughts weren't his usual companions on the trail. Isaac Blackwood had long ago accepted his nomadic existence, moving from job to job across the vast expanse of the Western Territories. He'd never much considered settling down, having seen too many men trapped in lives they hadn't chosen, shackled by responsibility. Yet something about the fierce independence of Willa Montgomery stirred his admiration. And the way she sang to her child, with such tenderness amid such hardship, that had touched something deep within him he'd thought long buried. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Isaac woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Willa at the stove, Thomas secured against her back with a length of cloth while she worked. "Hope I didn't wake you," she said, noticing his movement. Thomas was up with the sun. "Best sleep I've had in weeks," Isaac replied truthfully, folding his bedroll. "That storm would have drowned me in the barn." Willa poured coffee into a tin cup and offered it to him. "I've got some johnny cakes frying. Not much, but they'll fill your belly." "More than I expected on the trail," Isaac said gratefully. He sipped the coffee, strong and black, feeling its warmth spread through him. "You've got a good place here." Willa looked around the cabin with a mixture of pride and weariness. "It needs work. The roof leaks in 3 places, and the north wall won't make it through another winter without reinforcement." "I could take a look before I go," Isaac offered. "Might be able to patch things up a bit." Surprise flickered across Willa's face. "You don't need to do that. Consider it payment for the supper and breakfast," Isaac replied. "Besides, I'm handy with a hammer." After breakfast, Isaac examined the cabin's exterior. The north wall, as Willa had said, was in poor shape, with warped boards that had pulled away from the frame. The roof needed several shingles replaced. It was more than a morning's work, but he could at least make a start. Willa brought out her small supply of tools and some salvaged lumber she'd been collecting. "The previous owner left these behind," she explained. "I've been meaning to get to the repairs, but you've had your hands full," Isaac finished, nodding toward Thomas, who was now contentedly nursing at her breast. Willa had covered herself modestly with a shawl, but the intimacy of the moment made Isaac avert his eyes. He set to work on the roof first, replacing damaged shingles and securing loose ones. From his vantage point, he could see for miles across the rolling prairie. It was beautiful country, with the distant mountains creating a dramatic backdrop to the east. "How long have you been here?" he called down to Willa, who was sorting nails on the porch while Thomas slept in her lap. "Since last fall," she replied. "I came west from Illinois after my mother died. She left me enough to buy this place." "That's a long journey for a woman alone." Willa looked up at him, shielding her eyes from the sun. "I wasn't alone then. Thomas came along the way." Isaac nodded, understanding the unspoken circumstances. "You're brave, Miss Montgomery." "Not brave," she corrected. "Just didn't have any other choice." By midday, Isaac had repaired the roof and was working on reinforcing the north wall. Willa brought him water and watched his progress with evident appreciation. "You're good at this," she observed. "Had to learn a bit of everything over the years," Isaac replied, driving a nail with precise strokes. "Cowboying doesn't always pay, so I've built barns, dug wells, even tried my hand at mining once. And yet you keep moving." Isaac paused, considering her observation. "Guess I've never found a reason to stay put." Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. Willa was the first to look away. "I should start dinner," she said. "Stay another night if you'd like. You've more than earned your keep." Isaac knew he should refuse. Fort Laramie was still a good 2 days' ride, and he had a job waiting. But the thought of another evening in the small cabin, with Willa's singing and the curious gaze of baby Thomas, was unexpectedly appealing. "If you're sure it's no trouble," he said. "No trouble," she replied softly. "It's nice to have the company." That evening, after a simple dinner of cornbread and beans, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Thomas lay content in Willa's arms, occasionally reaching up to touch her face with tiny fingers. "Will you sing for him?" Isaac asked. "Even though there's no wind tonight?" Willa smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "He likes it any time, really. It's just that the wind seems to upset him especially." She began to sing, her voice clear and sweet in the still evening air. Isaac closed his eyes, letting the unfamiliar melody wash over him. It spoke of lands he'd never seen, of sorrows and joys he could only imagine. When she finished, they sat in companionable silence for a while. "My mother was Irish," Willa finally said. "She came over during the famine when she was just a girl. Never talked much about it, but she'd sing those old songs when she thought no one was listening." "It's beautiful," Isaac said. "What do the words mean?" "I'm not entirely sure. Something about a love that persists beyond distance and time." Willa looked down at her son, who had fallen asleep. "I wish I'd asked her more about it while I had the chance." "What brought you out here specifically?" Isaac asked. "There are easier places to make a life." Willa was quiet for so long that Isaac thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thomas's father was a man passing through our town. He was handsome and full of stories about the West. When he found out I was carrying his child, he disappeared." She stroked Thomas's cheek gently. "The town turned against me. My mother was already sick, and the scandal only made things worse. After she died, there was nothing to keep me there. And the man? Did you try to find him?" Willa shook her head firmly. "I don't want anything from him. Thomas and I will make our own way." Isaac admired her determination, even as he recognized the immense challenge she faced. "It won't be easy out here alone." "Nothing worth doing ever is," she replied. "And we're not entirely alone. The Wilkinsons check in when they can, and Mr. Greeley at the trading post has been kind." "Still," Isaac said, "a woman and child on the frontier. Are you suggesting I can't manage?" There was an edge to her voice now. "Not at all," Isaac assured her. "Just that everyone needs help sometimes, even the most independent among us." The conversation lapsed into silence again, but it was a thoughtful one. As darkness settled around them, Willa stood with Thomas still sleeping in her arms. "I should put him down," she said. "Dawn comes early." Isaac remained on the porch a while longer, smoking a cigarette and contemplating the vast starlit sky. His life had always been defined by movement, the next job, the next town, the next adventure. He'd never questioned it before, had never felt the pull of permanence. Yet as he listened to Willa moving quietly inside the cabin, preparing Thomas for the night, he found himself wondering what it might be like to have a place to return to, a place where someone might be waiting. Such thoughts were dangerous for a man who'd chosen freedom above all else. Still, they persisted as he finally entered the cabin and prepared his bedroll near the dying embers of the fire. Willa emerged from her bedroom with a quilt in her arms. "It gets cold near morning," she said, offering it to him. "Thank you," Isaac replied, accepting the unexpected kindness. The quilt was handmade, a patchwork of faded fabrics that spoke of history and care. "It was my mother's work," Willa explained, seeing his appreciation. "One of the few things I brought with me. It's fine craftsmanship," Isaac said, running his fingers over the intricate stitching. "You're fortunate to have such a remembrance." Willa nodded, her expression softening. "What about your family? Do they know where you are?" "Haven't got much family left," Isaac admitted. My parents died when I was young. My sister lives in Missouri with her husband and children. We write when we can, but it's been years since I've seen them. That sounds lonely, Willa observed. Isaac had never thought of his life in those terms before. I suppose it can be, but there's a certain freedom in it too. Freedom, Willa repeated, as if testing the word. There are different kinds, I think. Freedom from and freedom to. And which are you seeking out here? She considered the question seriously. Both, I suppose. Freedom from judgment, from the constraints of society. And freedom to raise my son as I see fit, to build something that's truly ours. Her insight impressed him. That's a worthy aim. And you? She asked. What are you seeking in your travels? It was Isaac's turn to ponder. I've never thought much beyond the next horizon, he admitted. There's always been something pulling me forward. But never anything pulling you back? The question struck him with unexpected force. No, he said softly. I guess there hasn't been. Their eyes met in the dim firelight, and Isaac felt a subtle shift in the air between them. Willa was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way that grew more evident the longer he looked at her. And there was a depth to her, a resilience and intelligence that intrigued him. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken possibilities, until Thomas's cry from the bedroom broke the spell. He needs feeding, Willa said, quickly rising. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. Isaac, he corrected. Please. She paused at her bedroom door. Good night, Isaac. Good night, Willa. Morning found Isaac awake before dawn, his mind made up. He needed to continue to Fort Laramie. People were counting on him. But as he carefully folded Willa's quilt and began gathering his few possessions, he found himself reluctant to leave. The sound of Willa's voice came from her bedroom, soft and melodic as she sang to Thomas. Isaac paused, listening, a strange ache forming in his chest. Then, with deliberate movements, he stoked the fire and put coffee on to boil. When Willa emerged with Thomas, she seemed surprised to find him still there. I thought you might have gone already. Not without saying goodbye, Isaac replied. And I wanted to finish that north wall before I left. Relief flickered across her face. You've done more than enough already. It won't take long, he insisted. And I'd feel better knowing you're properly sheltered. After a quick breakfast, Isaac set to work on the remaining repairs while Willa tended to her garden. It was a domestic scene that felt strangely right to him, the woman working the soil, the baby sleeping nearby in a makeshift cradle, and his own hands building and strengthening. By noon, the north wall was secure and Isaac had even managed to fix the loose porch railing. It was time to go, yet still he lingered, finding small tasks to occupy his hands. Finally, Willa called him to lunch, a simple meal of leftover cornbread and fresh greens from her garden. They ate mostly in silence, the impending farewell hanging between them. I've been thinking, Isaac said at last. I'll be back this way in about a month, after my business at Fort Laramie. If you'd allow it, I'd like to stop by and check on the repairs, maybe bring some supplies from town. Willa studied him, her expression guarded. You don't need to feel obligated. It's not obligation, Isaac assured her. I'd like to see how you and Thomas are faring. A small smile touched her lips. We'd welcome the visit, then. After lunch, Isaac saddled Chief and loaded his gear. Willa stood on the porch with Thomas, watching his preparations. Thank you, she said as he mounted up, for everything. It was my pleasure, Isaac replied sincerely. You take care of that boy, and you take care on the trail. Isaac tipped his hat, gave Chief a gentle kick, and rode away from the small cabin. At the top of the rise, he turned for one last look. Willa was still on the porch, Thomas in her arms, and the wind had picked up just enough to carry the faint sound of her singing across the distance. Something tugged at Isaac's heart, a feeling he couldn't quite name. With effort, he turned Chief toward Fort Laramie and didn't look back again. The next month passed in a blur of activity. Isaac delivered messages to Fort Laramie, took on a job escorting a surveying party along the North Platte, and even spent a week helping a rancher round up strays after a spring storm scattered his herd. Through it all, the memory of Willa's cabin and her haunting songs remained with him. When his business was concluded, Isaac found himself in Cheyenne with a decision to make. The logical move would be to head south, where work was plentiful on the big cattle spreads. Instead, he found himself purchasing supplies: coffee, sugar, flour, ammunition, even a bolt of sturdy blue fabric that he thought might suit Willa. "Wife waiting at home?" the shopkeeper asked with a knowing smile as he wrapped the fabric. "Just a friend," Isaac replied, though the word seemed inadequate for what Willa had come to represent in his thoughts. The journey back to her cabin took 3 days. With each mile, Isaac's anticipation grew, accompanied by an unfamiliar nervousness. What if she didn't welcome his return? What if she'd only been polite in accepting his offer to visit? These doubts vanished the moment he topped the rise and saw the cabin below. Smoke rose from the chimney, and in the small garden plot, Willa worked the soil. Even from a distance, he could see that she'd expanded the garden considerably since his departure. As he approached, Willa straightened and shaded her eyes, watching his approach. When recognition dawned, her face broke into a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through Isaac's chest. "You came back," she called as he dismounted. "Said I would, didn't I?" Isaac replied, leading Chief toward the cabin. His eyes searched for Thomas. "Where's the little one?" "Napping, thank goodness," Willa said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's been fussy all morning." Isaac removed his hat as he reached her. Up close, he could see that she looked tired but healthy, her skin tanned from working outdoors, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. "You've been busy," he observed, nodding toward the expanded garden. "Had to be," she replied. "Winter will come sooner than we think." The use of "we" wasn't lost on Isaac. Willa and Thomas, facing the frontier together. He wondered if there might ever be room in that "we" for someone else. "I brought some things from town," he said, gesturing to his saddlebags. "Nothing fancy, just essentials." Willa's eyes widened. "You didn't have to do that." "Wanted to," Isaac corrected. "And there's something else." He untied a small bundle from behind his saddle. "Seeds, variety of vegetables that should do well in this soil. And a few flowers too." Willa accepted the bundle with evident emotion. "This is too generous." "Not at all," Isaac insisted. "Just neighborly." A cry from inside the cabin announced Thomas's awakening. Willa handed the seeds back to Isaac and hurried inside, emerging moments later with the infant in her arms. Thomas had grown in the month since Isaac had seen him, his face fuller, his movements more purposeful. "Someone's not happy about waking up alone," Willa said, bouncing the baby gently. "May I?" Isaac asked, setting down his packages and extending his arms. Willa transferred Thomas to him without hesitation, a gesture of trust that Isaac didn't take lightly. The baby stared up at him with solemn eyes before his face crinkled in what might have been a smile. "He remembers you," Willa said in wonder. "Smart boy," Isaac replied, grinning down at the infant. How could he forget his old friend Isaac? They spent the afternoon catching up on the events of the past month. Willa told him about her progress with the garden, about Thomas's first attempts at rolling over, about the visit from the Wilkinson family who had brought her a laying hen as a gift. In turn, Isaac shared stories of his recent travels, carefully editing out the more dangerous elements. He described the stunning vistas he'd seen, the characters he'd encountered, the changing landscape of the territories as settlers pushed ever westward. As evening approached, Isaac insisted on preparing dinner, producing salt pork and beans from his supplies and setting to work at Willa's cookstove with surprising competence. "Where did you learn to cook?" Willa asked, watching him from her seat at the table, where she was nursing Thomas. "When you live on the trail, you either learn to cook or you eat poorly," Isaac replied with a shrug. "I prefer to eat well when I can." The meal was simple but satisfying, and afterward, they sat on the porch as they had before, watching the sunset. Thomas lay on a blanket between them, kicking his legs energetically and reaching for invisible objects in the air. "How long will you stay?" Willa asked, the question quiet but direct. Isaac had been pondering this himself. "I've got no pressing business elsewhere," he admitted. "Thought I might stay a few days if that's acceptable. Help with some projects around the place." "You're welcome as long as you like," Willa said, then quickly added, "That is, Thomas and I appreciate the help." Isaac nodded, understanding her caution. A woman alone had to be careful of her reputation, even in the remote wilderness. "I can sleep in the barn," he offered, "now that the weather's fair." "Nonsense," Willa replied firmly. The floor by the fire served well enough before. As darkness fell, Thomas began to fuss. Willa lifted him, but instead of retreating inside, she began to sing. The same haunting melody Isaac had first heard on the wind now filled the peaceful evening air. He watched her face as she sang, the tenderness in her expression as she gazed at her son, the way the last light of day caught in her hair. Something stirred in him, a longing he'd never acknowledged before. When the song ended, Thomas was asleep. Willa continued to rock him gently, lost in her own thoughts. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked softly. She looked up as if surprised by the question. "I was thinking about my mother," she admitted. "Wondering what she would make of this life I've chosen. If she would be proud or horrified." "I think she'd be proud," Isaac said with conviction. "You're building something here, something real. That takes courage." "And you?" Willa asked, her gaze direct. "What are you building, Isaac Blackwood?" The question caught him off guard. "I'm not sure I'm building anything," he confessed. "Just living day to day, I suppose." "And is that enough?" Isaac had never considered his life insufficient before. He'd valued his freedom, his ability to move on whenever the mood struck, the lack of entanglements that might hold him back. Yet sitting here with Willa and Thomas, he found himself questioning those values for the first time. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "It always has been. Until," Willa prompted, sensing his unspoken thought. Isaac met her gaze. "Until now, maybe." The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Then Thomas stirred, breaking the spell, and Willa rose to take him inside. "Good night, Isaac," she said, pausing at the door. "I'm glad you came back." "So am I," he replied, and meant it more than he could express. The next few days established a routine. Isaac would wake at dawn and handle the outside chores, chopping wood, tending to Chief and Willa's small flock of chickens, making repairs to the cabin and outbuildings. Willa focused on the garden, cooking and caring for Thomas, who seemed to grow more alert and engaged by the day. In the evenings, they would sit together, talking long into the night about their pasts, their hopes, their views on the changing world around them. Isaac found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to another soul, and Willa seemed equally willing to open up about her life. "I was engaged once," she revealed one night as they sat before the fire, Thomas asleep in his crib. "Before Thomas's father came along. A shopkeeper's son in our town." "What happened?" Isaac asked, curious about this glimpse into her past. Willa stared into the flames. He wanted a wife who would be content to live above his father's store, to bear children and keep house and never question her place. I wanted more, though I couldn't have said what more meant then. She glanced at Thomas. Now I know. And do you regret it? The path that led you here. Parts of it, she admitted. I regret the pain I caused my mother. I regret my naivete in believing Thomas's father's promises. Her expression hardened. But I don't regret Thomas. Not for a single moment. And I don't regret leaving Illinois. This land is hard, but it's honest in its hardness. Isaac nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The frontier doesn't lie to you or try to be something it's not. Unlike people, Willa added with a wry smile. Some people, Isaac corrected. Not all. Their eyes met across the fire, and Isaac felt that same pull he'd experienced before. Willa Montgomery was unlike any woman he'd ever known, strong yet vulnerable, fiercely independent yet deeply nurturing, practical yet dreamy. What about you? She asked, breaking their gaze to stir the fire. Any almost wives in your past? Isaac chuckled, though the question touched on memories he rarely revisited. There was a girl in Missouri years ago. Margaret was her name. We were sweet on each other for a summer. What happened? Her father didn't approve of a man with no roots and no prospects, Isaac said simply. And he wasn't wrong. I couldn't have given her the life she deserved then. And now? Willa's question was careful, neutral. Isaac considered it seriously. Now I've got some savings. Skills that are useful most anywhere. I could probably make a decent living if I settled somewhere. He shrugged. Just never found a reason to stop moving. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Isaac found himself returning to Willa's question later as he lay on his bedroll, listening to the quiet sounds of the cabin at night. What would it take for him to put down roots? And was he capable of the kind of commitment that a place and a family would require? The next morning, as Isaac was repairing a loose board on the barn, Willa approached with Thomas in her arms. I need to visit the trading post, she announced. We're low on several essentials, and I've got eggs to trade. I could go for you, Isaac offered immediately. Willa shook her head. Thomas and I could use the outing. We haven't been further than the garden in weeks. She hesitated, then added, You're welcome to join us, if you'd like. The invitation pleased him more than it should have. I'd be glad to. It's been a while since Chief had a proper ride. They set out mid-morning, Isaac on Chief and Willa on her steady mare, with Thomas secured to her chest in a sling. It was a perfect spring day, the air fresh and cool, wildflowers dotting the prairie in splashes of color. This country suits you, Isaac observed as they rode side by side. Willa sat her horse with natural grace, her face lifted to the sun. It does, she agreed. Sometimes I feel like I was meant to find this place, as if my whole life was leading me here. Even the hard parts? Especially those, she said with a small smile. They're what made me strong enough for this life. At the trading post, Mr. Greeley greeted Willa warmly and made a fuss over Thomas, who was now awake and observing everything with wide, curious eyes. The old trader raised an eyebrow at Isaac's presence but made no comment beyond a friendly greeting. As Willa conducted her business, trading eggs for supplies and purchasing a few items she couldn't produce herself, Isaac wandered the small store. His attention was caught by a shelf of books, an unexpected find in such a remote location. Greeley's wife was a schoolteacher, Willa explained, noticing his interest. He keeps books for her memory, and to bring a bit of civilization to the territory, he says. Isaac picked up a volume of poetry, leafing through it thoughtfully. Do you read much? When I can, Willa replied. I brought a few books with me, but I've read them all many times over. Without hesitation, Isaac added the poetry book to Willa's purchases, ignoring her protests. "Consider it a gift for Thomas," he said. "Every boy should grow up with poetry, even if he doesn't understand it yet." On the ride home, they took a different route at Willa's suggestion, following a stream that wound through a small valley lush with spring growth. They stopped to rest the horses and allow Thomas, who had been remarkably patient, some time out of the sling. Isaac spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree, and Willa laid Thomas on his stomach, where he immediately began attempting to push himself up with his arms. "He's strong," Isaac remarked, watching the baby's determined efforts. "Like his mother," Willa replied with a hint of pride. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful setting and the gentle gurgle of the stream. Thomas eventually tired himself out and fell asleep on the blanket between them. "I could stay here forever," Willa said softly, gazing out at the valley. "Build a real life for Thomas and myself." "I believe you could," Isaac said. "You've got the determination for it." She turned to look at him directly. "What about you, Isaac? Could you see yourself staying somewhere like this? Or is the open road always going to call you?" It was a loaded question, one that probed at the very heart of his identity. Isaac took his time answering, wanting to be honest both with Willa and himself. "I've never thought much about staying anywhere," he admitted. "Always figured I wasn't cut out for putting down roots. And now," her voice was steady, but he could sense the importance of his answer. "Now I'm not so sure," Isaac said. "These past days with you and Thomas, they've shown me something I didn't know I was missing." Willa's expression softened. "And what's that?" "Purpose, maybe. Connection." He gestured to the sleeping baby. "A reason to come back rather than just a reason to leave." The words hung between them, more revealing than Isaac had intended. Willa reached out slowly and touched his hand, a gesture so simple yet so profound that it nearly took his breath away. "I'm glad you came back this time," she said quietly. "So am I," Isaac replied, turning his hand to clasp hers. They might have stayed that way longer, but Thomas chose that moment to wake, demanding attention with insistent cries. The spell broken, they packed up and continued their journey home, both perhaps a little more aware of the possibilities unfolding between them. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Isaac brought out the poetry book. "Would you like me to read some?" he offered. Willa looked surprised. "You enjoy poetry?" "My mother taught me to read with poetry," Isaac explained. "Said it put music in language." They sat close together as Isaac read selected poems by Wordsworth and Keats, his deep voice giving new dimension to the familiar words. Willa listened intently, occasionally closing her eyes to better absorb the imagery. When he finished reading Bright Star by Keats, the cabin was silent except for the crackling of the fire and Thomas's soft breathing from his crib. "That was beautiful," Willa whispered. "Thank you." Isaac closed the book, acutely aware of her nearness. "Poetry always makes me think of possibilities," he said, "of lives not yet lived." "What life would you live, if you could choose any?" Willa asked, her eyes reflecting the firelight. The question demanded honesty, and Isaac found himself unable to offer anything less. "A life with purpose," he said slowly, "with work that matters and people who matter." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Isaac knew he was at a crossroads. The path he'd traveled all his life, one of freedom and solitude, stretched behind him. Ahead lay something unknown, frightening in its permanence yet beckoning with its promise. "Willa," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we've only known each other a short while, but—" A sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin, followed by Thomas's startled cry. The moment shattered as Willa immediately rose to attend to her son. "The wind frightens him," she explained unnecessarily, lifting Thomas from his crib. "It's all right, little one. Mama's here." Despite her soothing words, Thomas continued to cry, his face reddening with the effort. Willa began to sing, the haunting melody that had first drawn Isaac to the cabin. But tonight it seemed to have little effect on the distressed infant. "May I try?" Isaac asked, standing and approaching them. Willa nodded gratefully and transferred Thomas to his arms. The baby's cries lessened slightly as Isaac cradled him against his chest and began to walk slowly around the cabin. "Now, young Thomas," he murmured, "what's all this fuss about? It's just the wind telling stories. Nothing to fear." To both his and Willa's surprise, Thomas began to quiet, his sobs turning to hiccups as he stared up at Isaac with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Keep talking to him," Willa encouraged. "He likes your voice." Isaac continued his gentle monologue, telling Thomas about the stars outside, about the brave horses in the barn, about the flowers that would soon bloom in his mother's garden. Gradually, the baby's eyelids grew heavy, and his breathing evened out. "He's asleep," Willa whispered in amazement. "Without singing." "Must be my boring stories," Isaac joked softly, still rocking the sleeping infant. Willa shook her head, her expression tender. "No, he trusts you." The simple statement affected Isaac profoundly. This tiny, vulnerable being trusted him. Isaac Blackwood, who had never stayed in one place long enough to be trusted by anyone. Carefully, he laid Thomas back in his crib, tucking the small blanket around him. When he straightened, Willa was standing very close, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being here, for caring about us." The last word hung in the air between them. Us. Willa and Thomas, a package deal, a family already formed. Isaac realized with sudden clarity that he wanted to be part of that us. Wanted it with an intensity that startled him. "Willa," he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek. "I do care. More than I thought possible." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid to trust again, to believe in promises." "I understand," Isaac replied, and he did. Her experience had taught her caution, just as his had taught him to avoid entanglements. They were both stepping into unknown territory. "I'm not asking for promises yet. Just time. Time to show you that I mean what I say." Willa opened her eyes, searching his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, for she nodded slowly. "Time," she agreed. "We have that." Isaac's hand moved from her cheek to gently cup the back of her neck. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Willa responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. It was a beginning, a promise of possibilities, and when they finally parted, both were breathing a little faster. "Stay," Willa whispered. "Not just tonight, but stay." The word held more meaning than its simple syllable suggested. Stay for days, for weeks, for a future neither of them could yet fully envision. "I'll stay," Isaac promised, and knew in that moment that his wandering days were coming to an end. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm and purpose Isaac had never experienced. Each day brought new tasks: expanding Willa's garden, building a proper chicken coop, reinforcing the cabin for the coming winter. Each evening brought conversations by the fire, shared meals, and the growing bond between them. And through it all, Thomas thrived, reaching new milestones that delighted both Willa and Isaac. His first proper laugh came when Isaac tossed him gently in the air. His first successful roll from back to stomach happened while Willa and Isaac watched, both cheering as if he'd accomplished something monumental. Isaac found himself fully invested in this small family's well-being and happiness. He rode to the trading post regularly, bringing back supplies and occasional treats. He befriended the Wilkinsons, who were initially suspicious of his presence at Willa's cabin, but eventually warmed to him after seeing his genuine commitment. One evening in early summer, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the tall grass, Willa broke a comfortable silence with a question. "Do you miss it? The traveling, the freedom?" Isaac considered this carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, knowing she deserved his honesty. "Not the loneliness, but the open spaces, the new horizons. It was all I knew for so long." Willa nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I wouldn't want you to feel trapped here. Is that what you're worried about?" Isaac asked, turning to face her. "That I'll wake up one day and need to leave?" She looked down at her hands. "It would be natural. This is a quiet life, far from excitement or adventure." Isaac reached over and took her hand. "Willa, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "I've had my fill of wandering. What I've found here with you and Thomas, this is the adventure I want now. Are you certain?" The vulnerability in her voice tugged at his heart. In answer, Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." In his palm lay a simple gold band, unadorned but well-crafted. Willa's eyes widened as she recognized it for what it was. "It was my mother's," Isaac explained. "The only thing of hers I kept. I've carried it all these years, never thinking I'd have use for it." He took a deep breath. "Willa Montgomery, I love you. I love Thomas as if he were my own. I want to build a life with you both right here. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Willa's eyes as she stared at the ring. "You truly want this? A ready-made family, a remote cabin, all the hardships that come with this life." "I want you," Isaac said simply. "The rest is just details." A smile broke through her tears. "Then yes, Isaac Blackwood. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. Their kiss sealed the promise, a commitment neither had expected to make, but both now embraced wholeheartedly. From the cabin came Thomas's cry, right on cue. They broke apart with laughter. "Your son has perfect timing," Isaac said, rising to his feet and offering Willa his hand. "Our son," she corrected, allowing him to pull her up. "If you're marrying me, you're getting him too, full package." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Isaac replied, following her inside to where Thomas waited, his small face brightening at the sight of them both. That night, as Thomas slept peacefully in his crib and Willa rested in Isaac's arms, now sharing the small bedroom rather than maintaining their previous separate sleeping arrangements, a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the cabin. "The wind's picking up," Isaac observed, tightening his embrace protectively. Willa murmured sleepily. "Thomas might wake." "If he does, we'll sing to him together," Isaac suggested. "It's the only thing that calms him, right?" Willa lifted her head to look at him, her expression soft in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Not anymore," she said. "Now he has both of us." Isaac kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of her words. They did have each other now, all three of them. A family forged in unlikely circumstances but bound by something stronger than blood. Outside, the wind continued to blow across the vast prairie, but inside the small cabin, all was calm. And as Isaac drifted towards sleep, he realized that after years of searching for something he couldn't name, he had finally found his true home. The wedding took place in late summer, a simple affair held outside the cabin with only the Wilkinsons, Mr. Greeley, and a traveling preacher as witnesses. Willa wore a dress made from the blue fabric Isaac had brought her months before, with wildflowers in her hair. Thomas, now able to sit up on his own, watched the proceedings from Mrs. Wilkinson's lap, occasionally babbling as if offering his own commentary. "I never thought I'd see the day Isaac Blackwood settled down," Mr. Greeley remarked during the modest celebration afterward. "You must be quite a woman, Mrs. Blackwood." "She is," Isaac answered before Willa could, his pride evident in his voice and expression. "The best I've ever known." Willa blushed at the compliment, still adjusting to her new name and status. "We're fortunate to have found each other," she said, reaching for Isaac's hand. As their guests departed with the setting sun, leaving the new family to their first evening as an official unit, Isaac and Willa stood on the porch, Thomas sleeping against his mother's shoulder. "Happy?" Isaac asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever imagined possible," Willa replied honestly. "When I came here, I thought I was choosing isolation as the price for independence. I never expected to find love." "Life has a way of surprising us," Isaac said, thinking of how a woman's song on the wind had altered his entire existence. "I'm grateful for it." That autumn brought abundant harvests from the expanded garden and a sense of security as they prepared for the winter ahead. Isaac proved as adept at homesteading as he had been at driving cattle, adapting his varied skills to their needs with enthusiasm and determination. Thomas continued to grow and develop, now crawling energetically around the cabin and attempting to pull himself up on any available furniture. His personality emerged more clearly each day, curious, determined, and remarkably good-natured despite the occasional frustrations of infancy. "He has your stubbornness," Willa observed one evening as Thomas repeatedly attempted to reach a wooden toy just beyond his grasp. "And your persistence," Isaac countered with a smile. "Poor boy got the worst of both of us." "Or the best," Willa suggested, watching as Thomas finally succeeded in his quest, his face lighting up with triumph. As winter approached, bringing the first snows and long evenings confined to the cabin, Isaac and Willa found new rhythms to their shared life. He carved toys for Thomas and taught Willa to play checkers. She continued her singing, now often joined by Isaac's deeper voice in harmonies that delighted their son. They talked of the future, making plans that would have seemed impossible to either of them a year before. Isaac would build an addition to the cabin come spring. They would increase their livestock beyond the few chickens and Willa's mare. Perhaps in time they might even establish a small ranch of their own. "And more children?" Isaac asked one night as they lay together, the cabin quiet except for the crackling fire and Thomas's soft breathing from his crib. "I'd like that," Willa said, her hand finding his beneath the covers. "Thomas should have brothers and sisters. A whole brood of Blackwoods," Isaac mused, the idea filling him with unexpected joy. "Running wild on the prairie. With your eyes and my common sense," Willa added with a laugh. "Poor things," Isaac replied, pulling her closer. "Doomed to be stubborn and beautiful." Winter deepened, bringing storms that howled around the cabin like hungry wolves. During one particularly fierce blizzard, Thomas developed a fever that had both parents frantic with worry. For 3 days, they took turns holding him, trying to cool his burning skin with damp cloths, forcing tiny sips of water between his parched lips. "We should have settled closer to town," Isaac said on the second night, pacing the floor with Thomas in his arms. "Somewhere with a doctor nearby." "We couldn't have known," Willa replied, though her face reflected his fear. "And we're doing everything we can." On the third day, when Thomas's fever finally broke and he opened his eyes with recognition rather than delirium, Isaac and Willa held each other and wept with relief. "I couldn't bear to lose him," Isaac confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "When did he become so much a part of me?" "The moment you found us," Willa answered simply. "The moment you stayed." Spring's arrival brought renewal and fresh energy to their small homestead. Thomas took his first unsteady steps as the snow melted, toddling from Isaac to Willa with determined concentration. "That's it, son," Isaac encouraged, kneeling with open arms. Come to Pa. The word still felt new on his tongue, but increasingly right. Though not Thomas's biological father, Isaac had embraced fatherhood with a devotion that surprised even him. In his heart, Thomas was his son in every way that mattered. As promised, Isaac began work on an addition to the cabin, enlisting the help of Mr. Wilkinson and his sons for the heaviest labor. The new room would give them much-needed space as their family grew. And grow it would, they discovered as summer approached. Willa's announcement that she was expecting a child in the winter filled Isaac with a mixture of joy and trepidation. "Another winter baby," Willa said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Let's hope this one doesn't mind the wind as much as Thomas did." "If it does, we know what to do," Isaac replied, drawing her close. "We'll sing together." As Willa's pregnancy progressed, their life settled into a pattern of productive days and peaceful evenings. Isaac took on more responsibility for Thomas, allowing Willa to rest when needed, and their bond deepened through shared activities and adventures. "Story Pa" became Thomas's favorite demand, and Isaac obliged with tales of his travels, carefully edited for young ears, or with readings from the growing collection of books they'd accumulated. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard, Willa turned to Isaac with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder about him?" she asked. "Thomas's father, I mean." The question caught Isaac off guard. They rarely discussed the man who had fathered Thomas, an unspoken agreement that seemed natural given Isaac's role in the boy's life. "Sometimes," he admitted after a moment, "I wonder if he knows what he gave up, if he ever thinks about the son he never met." Willa nodded, her gaze following Thomas as he played. "I used to be so angry," she said quietly, "but now I almost feel grateful. If he had stayed, if he had been the man I initially thought he was, I wouldn't have come west, wouldn't have found this place, wouldn't have found you." Isaac took her hand, understanding the complexity of her feelings. "Life has strange ways of leading us where we need to be," he said. "I'm just thankful it led me to that rise above your cabin on a windy evening. When you heard me singing," Willa recalled with a smile. "The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard," Isaac confirmed. "Still is." As if on cue, Thomas ran to them, arms outstretched. "Mama, sing," he requested, his vocabulary expanding daily. Willa gathered him onto her lap, her pregnancy now visible beneath her dress, and began the old Irish lullaby that had first brought them together. Isaac joined in where he could, his deep voice complementing her clear soprano, creating a harmony that seemed to float on the evening air. Thomas leaned back against his mother, thumb in mouth, eyes growing heavy as the familiar melody worked its magic. And Isaac, watching his wife and son in the golden light of sunset, felt a contentment he'd never imagined possible in his wandering days. This was home, not just the cabin they'd expanded and improved, not just the land they were slowly taming, but these people who had become the center of his world. Willa, with her strength and tenderness. Thomas, with his curiosity and trust. And soon, the new life growing beneath Willa's heart, another link in the chain binding them together. Winter returned, bringing its challenges and isolated beauty. As the first heavy snow fell, Willa went into labor, earlier than expected but not dangerously so. Isaac had prepared as best he could, with clean linens, boiled water, and a determination to keep both Willa and their child safe despite the absence of a doctor. "You've done this before," he reminded her as the contractions intensified. "You're the strongest woman I know." "It doesn't make it any easier," Willa gasped, gripping his hand with surprising force. "Talk to me, Isaac. Distract me." So he talked, telling her about the plans he had for spring, about the rocking horse he was carving for Thomas, about the trip they would take to Cheyenne when the weather cleared. He talked until his voice grew hoarse, all the while supporting her, encouraging her, loving her. Thomas remained blissfully asleep in his small bed in the corner, unaware of the drama unfolding as his sibling prepared to enter the world. Shortly before dawn, with a final tremendous effort from Willa, their daughter arrived tiny, red-faced, and announcing her presence with a robust cry that left no doubt about her health. "She has your lungs?" Isaac said in wonder as he handed the swaddled infant to Willa. "And your beauty. And your timing," Willa replied weakly, exhausted but radiant. Arriving in the middle of a snowstorm, they named her Sarah, after Isaac's mother, and as the winter days passed, they marveled at how seamlessly she fit into their family. Thomas approached his role as big brother with solemn responsibility, bringing his toys to share, though Sarah was far too young to appreciate them, and patting her head with careful gentleness. "Mine," he would say proudly, pointing to the baby, then to himself. "Thomas's Sarah." "That's right," Willa would confirm. "Your sister." Unlike her brother, Sarah seemed untroubled by the wind, sleeping peacefully even when winter storms battered the cabin. But she loved music just as much, her eyes tracking the source of any singing with remarkable focus for a newborn. Another musical Blackwood, Isaac observed one evening as Willa sang both children to sleep. "We'll have a family choir before long." Spring brought new beginnings and developments. Thomas's vocabulary exploded, and he began forming simple sentences. Sarah responded to her name with smiles and coos. The garden flourished under Willa's care, and Isaac expanded their livestock to include a milk cow and a small flock of sheep. Their second anniversary approached, marked by a rare trip into the nearest town for supplies and a night at the small hotel, a luxury made possible by the Wilkinsons' offer to watch the children. "It feels strange to be away from them," Willa admitted as they sat in the hotel's dining room, enjoying a meal they hadn't had to prepare themselves. "Strange but nice," Isaac added with a grin, reaching across the table to take her hand. "To have my wife to myself for a change." Later, in the privacy of their room, they reconnected as husband and wife rather than just partners in parenting. And afterward, as Willa lay in his arms, Isaac found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" he asked softly, stroking her hair. Willa considered the question. "Not exactly this," she admitted. "When I left Illinois, I thought I was choosing independence over connection. I never dreamed I could have both. And are you happy with the choice? With this life we've built?" She raised herself on one elbow to look at him directly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said with conviction. "Are you?" Isaac pulled her close again, overwhelmed by the certainty of his answer. "I spent years looking for something I couldn't name," he said. "Freedom, adventure, purpose, I chased them all across the territories. But what I really needed was a home. You and the children gave me that." "And the wanderlust?" Willa asked. "Does it ever call to you still?" "Sometimes," Isaac admitted honestly, "but not in the same way. Now when I think of horizons, I think of showing them to Thomas and Sarah, of exploring together, then returning to our home." Willa's smile held understanding and love. "We could do that, you know. Take trips together when the children are older. See some of those places you've told us about." "I'd like that," Isaac said, the idea appealing to him. "A family adventure. But always coming home," Willa added, settling back against him. "Always," Isaac agreed, the word a promise he intended to keep for all the years to come. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family. Thomas became a sturdy, thoughtful boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet determination. Sarah grew into a spirited girl with a voice as clear as Willa's and a curiosity that led her into frequent misadventures. And there were more children. James, born in the summer of their 4th year together, and finally little Rose, arriving as they celebrated their 7th anniversary. The cabin expanded again and again to accommodate their growing family, eventually becoming a proper house with separate bedrooms for the children and conveniences that would have seemed luxurious to Willa in her early days of homesteading. Their land prospered too, the small garden evolving into productive fields, the few animals becoming respectable herds. Isaac's knowledge of cattle proved valuable as they established a modest ranching operation, while Willa's skills as a gardener and homemaker ensured their self-sufficiency. They weren't wealthy by Eastern standards, but they wanted for nothing important. The children grew strong and healthy, educated by their parents and occasional visiting teachers, enriched by books, music, and the natural wonders surrounding them. And through it all, the bond between Isaac and Willa deepened, weathering the inevitable challenges of frontier life with a partnership that had begun on a windy evening when a lonely cowboy heard a woman singing to her baby. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful meeting, as summer twilight descended on their ranch and their children played in the yard, Isaac and Willa sat on the porch of the house that had grown from that simple cabin. "Remember how it was?" Isaac asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That first night. You were so careful not to frighten me," Willa recalled with a smile. "Standing there with your hat in your hands. And you were so fierce," Isaac countered. "A mama bear protecting her cub." "I was terrified," Willa admitted. "A strange man appearing out of nowhere, and me all alone with a baby." "Not alone anymore," Isaac said, watching as Thomas, now 11, showed his younger siblings how to catch fireflies in jars. "None of us." The sound of the children's laughter carried on the evening breeze, a melody as sweet to their ears as any song. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Willa began to sing the old lullaby that had started everything. Isaac joined in, their voices blending as they had countless times over the years. One by one, the children noticed and came to the porch, adding their own voices to the familiar tune: Thomas's deepening boyish tenor, Sarah's pure soprano, James's enthusiastic if not always accurate rendition, and even little Rose's babbling attempts. The song rose into the summer night, carried by the same wind that had once frightened a baby boy and drawn a weary cowboy to the cabin where his heart would find its home. When the last notes faded, the family sat in contented silence, bound together by love and the shared melody that had become their own. "It still calms them," Isaac observed softly, nodding toward the now quiet children. "It calms all of us," Willa corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It reminds us where we came from, where we belong." Isaac tightened his arm around her, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they'd built together. "Right here," he agreed. "This is where we belong." And as night settled fully over the ranch, their home, their legacy, the Blackwood family gathered closer, sheltered by the walls they'd raised and the love they'd cultivated, while the eternal wind sang its own song across the vast Wyoming prairie.